is to be able to do this work as quickly as we could, that we should not have as large a table as we have today. And the committee, including me, during that discussion, realized that we needed a larger table, just like we have today. So I'm most appreciative that everyone is here. I hope you appreciate my apology, and we're going to try our best not to keep our table small. We need to keep our table large. So please appreciate that and accept my apology. As we begin, I'm going to ask the committee members, both Council President Albernaz and Councilmember Hucker, if they have any opening comments. I'm then going to ask if any other council members join us. At this point, I don't see anyone, but that doesn't mean that we won't have some additional. If they have any comments, and then if anybody else does have comments, please raise your hand, and I'll call on you. If in the event, and I don't mean to do this, but on Zoom, people jump all over the board sometimes. If I don't see your hand up, please either speak out or somebody else speak out so that we can do this. But we would like to get to the actual packet as quickly as we can, and call on Mr. Drummer for that. So with that, I'm going to ask Council President Albernaz if he has any opening comment, please.
I do. Thank you, Chairman Katz. First, I want to express my appreciation to you for your flexibility and ensuring that the table is widened for this discussion, because it is important. There's a lot riding on this, that we do our best to get this right so that there's trust on all sides, both from the community as well as law enforcement, that this is a fair process that all of us can count on moving forward. So thank you for that. I'll just note that at the chairman's request, in addition to the next committee session that we will then be shifting these to full council to complete our deliberation and discussion and ensure that we pass this in time for our colleagues in the executive branch to then be able to implement this critically important work and have everybody who has been recruited and trained and onboarded in time to meet the deadline. We have been let known that deadline will not be shifting, and so we will be adhering to it and making sure that we give these really important people the long enough runway to be able to do their work and do it effectively. I'll also note and take a personal point of privilege here, Chairman Katz, to note the following. You and I had the opportunity yesterday to represent the entire council at the memorial services for Officer Haggerty, and it was a very moving and deeply important event, both for his family, our police community, but also our entire community. And we once again want to express our deepest and most sincere condolences to Officer Haggerty and his family, our entire law enforcement community that came together yesterday in a way that was pretty powerful and meaningful. And by all accounts, Officer Haggerty was everything and more that you would want in an officer: a leader, a strong communicator, worked well with our community, loved his job, didn't complain about it, and was accessible to all. And so this conversation couldn't be more important, because in many ways it honors him and all of the officers who work so hard on behalf of all of us every day and work hard to establish communication and relationships with our community and ensure that trust moves forward. So I just wanted to take a point of privilege to mention that. And I also want to thank the advocates who are helping to strengthen this bill, ensure that we keep moving forward with transparency and trust within our community, which benefits law enforcement and all of us together collaboratively. So with that, I yield to you, Mr. Chairman, but I just wanted to make those comments.
And thank you for making those comments, Council President. Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly agree with everything that the Council President said about Officer Haggerty and what a tragic loss that is. I'm glad we're here today. I'm glad you broadened the table, Mr. Chairman. We had a instructive committee session last time. and we couldn't get as far as we needed to. And I hope we will today with the insight of so many experts who are stakeholders in our community and around the table. Harkening back to the hearing on this, it was really disappointing to hear how much frustration there was with this draft bill. I think we had 35 opponents, and it was frustrating to me to go to Annapolis and hear from both House and Senate leadership that we had been sent a bill that doesn't comply with state law. And we have to do both. We have to have a bill that complies with state law and meets the deadline, and we have to have one that creates the oversight and accountability that's envisioned in the law, in the spirit of the law, and that I think we all want as a community. And ideally, we can go beyond the state law to build even more public trust, which I think we all want in Montgomery County. I think our law enforcement officers want that. I think community advocates want that. I think lawmakers, everybody wants that. So, we want a community and a law enforcement structure working, in sync with a high amount of trust and communication and collaboration. So hopefully we'll get closer to that goal today. I appreciate everybody being here, all the advocates, all our employees, all of our stakeholders, and appreciate you for putting this together, Mr. Chairman. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I do see Councilmember Jawando is on the call. I don't know. I see his picture. I don't see Councilmember Jawando.
There you
go. Okay.
Yeah, if I'm trying to get my computer to work here, so hopefully it'll let me in and I can make a couple of comments. I appreciate
it says that you're connecting, so we can hear you if you want to make comments, please.
You can hear me and see me.
Yeah, I can see you. We can hear you and see you. There you go.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And always good to join my favorite ad hoc committee, the Public Safety Committee, and appreciate the comments of my colleagues and the fact that we're going to move this important bill to full council soon so that we can get it done and get it done right. I also want to send my condolences to the Officer Haggerty's family. I'm glad the council president and the chair of public safety were able to represent the council. We had a lot going on yesterday for everybody. And I just want to say on this bill as well, I'm glad we've included the members of the Police Advisory Committee. Appreciate all your thoughtful input. I appreciate that we've also included other community members here from SSJC. I see we have Ms. Silver here. I'd like to see that be a more common occurrence in our committee structures and with the council business, that we include other folks that are important to the conversation. So I think this is a really good precedent. I want to thank the chair for that. And I want to get into the issues. And I think this is a critical bill. It is a centerpiece to making sure that there is trust, transparency, and accountability but between law enforcement and the community that they are sworn to protect. And I think that there's no more important relationship, and this will set an important tone in how we move through this, what the rules are, how it's complied with is obviously critically important. So really looking forward to getting this done and doing it right, and appreciate the opportunity to join my colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I did want to publicly thank the council president I believe we're going to have one more public safety committee meeting on this topic, and then it'll go to full council to have a work session of the as a committee of the whole. And one of the reasons for that is because we're under such a tight time frame that perhaps when we finally can vote on this, that everyone, since they've been engaged, all of the council members been engaged, we can move it as quickly as possible and still get it right. That's an important part of this. So with that, do any of the chiefs or anyone else have anything before we actually get into the work that we're here to do today? Does anybody else have any comments?
Chairman Katz, I just wanted to let you know that we learned this morning that the MPSTC is going to have a closed meeting on Tuesday to discuss the draft PAB and ACC regulations that they have been drafting. And at that point, I think they're going to make a decision about how they're going to release those publicly for comments. So I just want to give you an update on that timeline. So that should be next week. We should have a better idea of when those are likely to come.
I appreciate Dr. Stoddard. Could you please explain what all those initials, that alphabet soup, stands for?
Yeah, the MPSDC is the Maryland Police Standards and Training Commission. They were empowered by the legislature to develop guidelines. I think they're viewing that empowerment pretty broadly, and meaning that they're drafting regulations that would govern the way the police accountability boards at the local and state level, as well as the administrative charging committees at the local and state level, would function in some ways. They've set some standards for how often they meet, how many members are on on the charging committee, particularly what the process for seeking applications. We haven't seen all of the updated guidance, so I don't know exactly how far they're going to go, but we've heard enough to know that they're going to give some regulation, as it were, for how those committees should generally operate. They won't govern everything. There'll be a lot of local latitude in this, but there will be some state requirements.
And thank you. And that was one of the discussions that we had last time, and probably prior to that whether there was a question whether it was going to be mandatory or whether it was going to be suggested requirements, and we still don't know, obviously, but there is a possibility that this be mandatory. And so we need to keep that in mind as well. Anyone else? I see Ms. Silver's hand is up. Ms. Silver, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for including the community in this work session. I think this has been a long time coming in our view, and we do appreciate that you've taken this step, and we hope that this is going to set a precedent for future meetings of this committee. Just in responding to Dr. Stoddard, we also spoke with someone from the commission who told us that they were meeting to vote and finalize their position on the regulations on April 15th. So it wouldn't be until that date that the notice and comment period would begin. So that's the timeline we were given. I don't know if this is the timeline that Dr. Stoddard just referenced is more of an internal working group timeline, but that the full commission wouldn't be finalizing the regulations until April 15th, which is a long way off. And that is why our position is that this council needs to go ahead and develop a bill that makes sure that both of these boards have what they need to do their job as described in HB 670. And we do hope that the bill that you create will comply with best practices for civilian oversight and further racial justice, and make sure that these boards have everything they need, including compensation, independent staff, power to review a large number of complaints involving all matters regarding how the police interact with the public, and hopefully investigative power as well. So thank you again for having us here.
Thank you, and thank you for your words. With that, we're going to actually begin. Ms. Silver, your hand is still up. So, Councilmember Hucker, please.
Just a quick follow-up on it's great to hear from Dr. Stoddard about the draft regulations. I think I asked this last time, and I'm wondering if anybody from OIR is here. It's frustrating to be in this position where, we have both a mandate from the state government and a quick timeline to meet it. We are only one of 24 jurisdictions that are facing the same problem. And I'm wondering, aside from the formal regulation drafting and approval process, is there anything less formal that we have from leadership in Annapolis, from the committees of jurisdiction, saying that, here are, sort of best practices or our recommendations on some of these very basic issues like the size and the membership and the training of the committee?
I just want to note that OIR is the Office of Intergovernmental Relations. We do too much of that. We do too much of just initials. Is anybody here to answer Councilmember Hucker's? No? Okay.
I don't think I want to get an answer
for that. Chief Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as the size of the committees, the Administrative Charging Committee has a set number of 5 members according to the statute.
Yeah.
The PAB doesn't have such structure, but I don't think that anybody has come out yet with any best practice regarding this process, because everybody's struggling just like we are to get
right. It'll just be I didn't mean to overemphasize that one example, but I appreciate everything you're saying. It would just be a shame if we come up with one bill and Prince George's has a slightly different one and Howard has a slightly different bill, there's not any kind of agreement on the front end of where we're really trying to head, because I bet we all have similar goals. But anyway, back to you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry.
Thank you. And with that, I don't see any other hands. That doesn't mean none are up, but I don't see any. So with that, I'm going to turn to Mr. Drummer to please lead us through the packet.
Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Just a quick recap in what happened last time. The first committee session, the committee discussed the bill, the racial equity, social justice impact statement. Obviously, the committee talked about the regulations that were just mentioned from the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission. The committee did approve and did make a couple of decisions. They approved an amendment to clarify that all external complaints must be investigated and reported to the ACC. And agreed that the PAB membership should be more than 5, but didn't arrive at a final number. Also agreed that that at least in the first round of this bill, that the bill should simply cover the complaints that are required by the state law and not try and add in additional internal complaints from the county police department into the system at this time. So moving on through the packet, skipping to really number 2, which is there was a lot of discussion about qualifications for members serving on the Police Accountability Board, the PAB, and the Administrative Charging Committee, the ACC. But no decisions were made. I think it was pretty clear from the discussion that there need to be some changes from what's in the bill itself, but there was no agreement exactly what should be done for qualifications, other than to point out that since we are expecting regulations and they're probably not going to come in a timely basis, that we need to add in there that the members need to comply with the qualifications set up by state law. And that's already in the bill. In talking about the qualifications, I did put a suggestion in there of a different way to do it, not necessarily the only way to do it. Right now, it's an experience requirement. You need to demonstrate certain experience in personnel management, which is something that at least the Administrative Charging Committee is definitely going to do. That is what they're doing. They're essentially replacing the police chief in reviewing the investigation report by the police department and making a decision on whether to file, charge discipline against the officer or officers. So that's a job right now that's done by the police chief or assistant chiefs if the chief delegates it, but it's done by the police chief, and it will now be done by the charging committee. So there are some requirements to be able to do this. And I'm on page 8 of the staff report, the memo, to change experience requirements to something more subjective, but to be able to demonstrate the capacity to objectively evaluate an investigation report and prepare a reasonable charging decision based solely on the evidence before the committee. that could be shown through experience, but it could be shown through, professional experience. It could be shown in other ways as well, through lived experience or any other way. But just a statement that that's what you're looking for, because you are looking for somebody who's able to do that, because that's what you're going to be asking them to do. And it needs to be somebody who can do it objectively, and you need to think of both the police officers' rights and the department's trust, as well as the community's trust. There are probably other ways to write it and many other ways to do it. That's just one alternative. Do you want to, Chairman Katz, do you want to talk about this first, or do you want me to just keep going on?
No, I think we should do it point by point, unless others have another thought about that, so that we can at least accomplish as we go along, or have the discussions as we go along. Are there any comments on Mr. Drummer's comments?
Just a couple. So this is a really good overview. I do think, to your point though, Chairman Katz, it would be helpful if we, did go line item by line. I'm starting with the number of participants, as he noted at the beginning. This is great to provide context for, the overall issues, but and we should do that to kind of refresh our memories and level set where we are in the conversation. But I agree with you that, point by point, and then a discussion on each one of those makes sense.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawanda.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's more of a kind of a question for you of what we want to handle first. Do we want to start with the number? That number would probably be easiest. And then I think the qualifications, I have thoughts and additional, suggestions to the committee there. So it's just a matter of how you want to move. I know we've had some community input around wanting to move to 9 members. I'm be fine. I think that's fine. I had suggested 7 in an initial draft that we had sent over to the county executive, early on. But I think 9's good too. So just maybe suggest that, and then I do have thoughts on other items here, but maybe I'll just pause there.
Thank you. I actually believe that 9 is the best number. And I believe one of those should be, because at this point, the municipal police forces are also included in this board, that not that they necessarily wanted to be, but by state law, I believe that it's fair to have at least one person living in a municipality that has a police force. Not all municipalities have police forces in Montgomery County. That one person be at least one person would be from living in one of those municipalities. And so I believe that 9 is a good number. We all, I think, have seen the discussions about that it should be an odd number, and I agree with that. And I believe we have seen, and of course you start seeing enough of these numbers and enough suggestions, but I believe we've seen most people who have suggested the 9. And if that's wrong, I know that no one's going to be shy and tell me that I'm wrong, but I believe that that's correct as well. So I'm in favor of 9. Council President Albernaz.
Thank you. I think 9's a reasonable number too. I did have a couple of questions for Mr. Drummer, just for context. So I know we're going to be discussing compensation for these members to ensure even higher degree of accountability and that they can more consistently participate. But Mr. Drummer, could you talk about what the requirements are of participation? Are they required to attend each of the meetings? Is there discussion of a quorum, and what would that quorum be if we do get to 9? Just if you could just shed any light or background on those aspects of this, I just would like to have that information.
Well, as far as a quorum is concerned, unless the law says something else, a quorum is a majority of the members. So it would be 5. If you have 9, it would be 3 if you have 5. And as far as we generally, on all our boards and commissions, we already have a law that requires you to, or makes you eligible for being booted off the board, essentially, if you miss a certain number of meetings. That would apply to this as well, unless you put something in the law that would be different. There's a general law about missing meetings. It's not mandatory that you're out. I think I forget the number of meetings if you miss, you can be removed from the board. There are provisions in the bill itself that talk about removal. I'm not sure it specifically says anything about removing for failure to attend, but that would be a reason you could remove somebody if they don't show up. That would be, it would sort of fit in neglect of duty if you're not there. The first rule of doing your job is showing up.
If I could just interrupt for 2 seconds, would that actually have to be a part of the legislation, or would that be part of, once the board is established, that they would establish?
No, it's not really up to the board to establish that. The removal, it's already in the law.
Right.
Is by the executive with the approval of at least 6 members of the council.
Excuse me, Council President, I yield back to you, please.
No. I had the same question, and I guess, consistency of participation is going to be critically important for these members, because they have to be able to hear all the same information at the same time. Or if they have pieces of it or miss a meeting or session here or there, then I think, just logistically, this isn't your traditional board, and that these are report outs. I mean, they're going to be going over specific cases. So, and that's again why I'm generally in favor of compensation.
Let me just distinguish between the 2 different boards. The Administrative Charging Committee is going to be looking at individual cases and making decisions. The Accountability Board is not. The Accountability Board is going to be choosing members for the ACC, and the chair of the board will automatically be on the ACC or another member that the chair designates. But the Accountability Board itself is going to be operating more as an advisory board, by looking at the overall system, reporting on it, how things are working, and making suggestions for changes if necessary. But they're not going to be looking at each individual case. That's not their job.
No, you're right. It's an important distinction, and I should have made that more clear in my comments. But I guess for consistency's sake, this board, although not directly involved in that decision making, as the appointing authority of the ACC, and wanting to stay on top of these issues, I think it will be important for there to be that consistency in participation. So, and I know we have a law in place that covers all boards and commissions. I'm thinking out loud. I'm not prepared to propose an amendment, but I just wonder if this specific board, given the critically important nature of this work, shouldn't be held to an even higher standard, so that there is consistency among its members and they can receive information, all at the same time. So that's just something I'm going to think through a little bit. I just throw it out as a discussion point at this point. Again, not an amendment, but going back to my original statement, I'm comfortable with 9, and I'm not opposed to ensuring one of those people represent our municipalities or live in one, given the unique nature of this oversight body that would include our municipalities, if that remains in. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Ms. Silver.
Mr. Katz, I had my hand. I'm sorry.
Alicia was on
Sorry,
first.
I missed your hand.
For a while.
I apologize. I did not
That's
see
okay.
it.
That's
We're going to
okay.
speak,
Good
we're going to
morning.
hear from Ms. Hudson, and then we're going to hear from Ms. Silver.
Thank you.
Please.
Good morning. Good morning, President Albernas, and good morning, council members. Since you're going line by line item, I will just infuse our recommendations as you go through. And regarding 9 members, that is also what the Hiring and Discipline Subcommittee agreed upon. Given our experience with the Policing Advisory Commission of 13 members, and because of life experiences, you know that we've lost a few members, and we are also, I believe, down to 9 at the moment. So that is what our subcommittee agreed on as well.
Thank you. And in all fairness to me, the reason I didn't see your hand is it got lost in your tree behind you from my angle. So I will try to see that better. If not, please speak out, just like you did. Ms. Silver, please.
Thank you. This is actually in response to Mr. Drummer's comments. HB 670 actually does order the PAB to review the outcomes of disciplinary matters that are considered by the ACC. So we actually view the PAB as having the power to review the individual cases. They may not be able to make this, they do not have the power to make decisions on the individual cases, but they do have the power, and they are actually instructed under state law to review the outcomes of the individual cases. And that's partly why we not only want them compensated, but we want them to have as much power to do that as possible. And in terms of obligations of both of the boards to ensure that they're doing the work, which Council President Albernos raised up in one of our requested amendments, which has not been mentioned in the staff packet, is that this bill require both boards to meet at least once a month. That's not in the bill. HB 670 doesn't even require the ACC to meet once a month, but that is a requirement that we had added and that we hope at some point the council will be willing to consider.
Actually, the bill does require the ACC to meet at least monthly.
It actually does. If you look at the language, they kind of struck that. And it's more of, I'll have to go back and look at it, but it's more of a suggested monthly meeting.
It's monthly or as frequently as needed. They anticipated that many jurisdictions would require a more frequent meeting than monthly.
Okay, I'll go back and look at that. Thank you.
And just so we're clear, that was on the which board were you talking about, Chief or Ms. Silver? That was PAB?
ACC.
The ACC. Okay. And that's also part of the whole discussion. We're talking about 2 separate boards, though we are, but we're not. So it gets nice and confusing from that angle as well. Thank you both.
Not to be confused with the Atlantic Coast Conference, which used to be great until they messed it up. And
thank you, Mr. Eduardo. I think we will now put you back on mute for that after that time. Anyhow, but I do agree with you on the ACC whole deal too, might we add, as a guy that went to University of Maryland when it was ACC. Mr. Drummer, on that note, is there consensus that the number be 9? Is that okay so that we can move on? Yes, I see head shaking.
Well,
yes. Okay. So
it sounds like we got 3-0, and do we have one of the members must reside in one of the 4 municipalities with a police department? That's agreed to as well.
Is that agreed to with the committee? Yes. Yes. Okay.
I think we should try it. I mean, in the future, it might make it harder to recruit somebody, but yeah, I think it's worth trying it.
May I make a suggestion here?
Please.
If you suggest, rather than say the 4 municipalities, maybe you say the municipalities covered by the countywide PAB, because if at a later point they allow an opt-out for jurisdictions, right, that would, for drafting purposes, allow you to just cover those that are actually part of this PAB.
That's good.
I think that's a fair language. The chiefs of those municipalities, do you have comment on that? Are you comfortable with what Dr. Stoddard just suggested?
John Fitzgerald here for Chevy Chase Village. I think that's a good idea.
Okay, good.
Councilmember, yeah, I'm very comfortable with that. I think representation is important.
Okay. Well, I have learned when you get a yes to move on. So anyhow, I think we've gotten yeses, Mr. Drummer. So let's move on to another.
We're moving back to qualifications. I just will say, I do have a different opinion than Ms. Silver about the authority. It does say that the accountability board is required to, review the outcomes, but that's in my mind, that's not an appeal from the ACC or do the exact same thing the ACC does. They're supposed to look at it overall. They're not supposed to be reviewing individual cases, to see whether something different should happen, because they have no authority to change it. When the ACC decision goes to the chief makes a decision, goes to the chief to offer the discipline recommended by the ACC. And if the officer accepts it, we're done. If the officer doesn't, you go to a trial board. There's no going back to the PAB. If the ACC finds that there's no discipline warranted, that's the end of it. It doesn't go to the PAB. The PAB can look at things. Oh, this isn't working. We've got statistics. This is how many cases. That's not supposed to be. They're not an appeals court for the ACC.
Okay, I'm going to turn back to Ms. Silver. Ms. Silver, if possible, could we try to wrap this part up, please?
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, because we don't consider the PAB to be an appeal board, but the law specifically says they can review the outcomes of disciplinary matters, and that is part of they have to then be able to review the individual matters and talk about what happened in an individual case, so that that can inform their other job, which is to advise the leaders of government and law enforcement about matters of policing. So just because they can't take an action on the outcome of an individual case does not mean that they can't be given the power and the resources they need to do a detailed review of each individual case, so that they can then advise on what should be done differently. And I just want to make sure you understand that we see a pretty fundamental difference from Mr. Drummer in terms of what they should be doing with their time, that this is not the PAC. This is a different type of board that really does have should be given the power to do a more in detail review. And I just do want to clarify, since I just looked at HB 670 again, that the language of the bill on the ACC's meetings says must meet one time each month or as needed, which does not mean at least one time a month. It means must meet one time each month or can meet as needed. I'm glad that the commission may be interpreting that as at least once a month, but that's not what the language says.
Now, that is left up to interpretation. I would take it that they have to meet at least once a month, or it should have said at least once a month rather than.
It did, but it was struck out.
Well,
That's what, actually, if you looked at, it was struck out originally, yeah.
Okay, all right. So anyhow, however we can word it so that it could be clear, unless the state changes that, we can't be clear. But anyhow, so.
Well, I think the legislature, I mean, for the ACC to meet, they need to have cases. If they don't have any cases, there's probably no reason for them to meet. So to the extent, mandating that they meet every month, just because you say they need to meet every month, they will if they have cases. But if they don't have anything in front of them, I'm not really sure what they would be meeting about. So to mandate how often they meet doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Okay.
Just me.
No, and I think that's a valid discussion as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hucker, did you? Oh, Mr. Juando.
Thank you. I think, since the state law does inartfully say what it says, I think it would be good to belt and suspenders the 1 month meeting every month requirement. I suspect, we are the largest jurisdiction based on my knowledge of the complaints, the number of complaints that currently exist, and what has happened in other jurisdictions that have implemented some sort of community-based charging or oversight body. I think we're going to see enough. There's going to be enough to do once a month. I think there will be, because the previous session you all corrected, I think appropriately, that complaints generated by citizens or however the complaint comes in, it doesn't need to be one that's anything involving it can be anything involving a citizen. I think there will be enough to do, and particularly early on, they're going to need to get together. So I would say that having the 1 month requirement makes sense.
Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Drummer, do we need to write that?
Well, let me just understand.
I'm sorry, apologies. That is also the Hiring and Discipline Subcommittee's Policing Advisory Commission's recommendation as well, once a month.
At least once
for the ACC, the PAB, or both?
At least once a month.
Ms. Hudson, did you hear Mr. Drummer's question?
Are we saying the PAB must meet once a month?
The PAB.
More frequently,
the
or
PAB,
the ACC?
The PAB, but we've heard discussion from Ms. Silver and Councilmember Jawando, that seems appropriate as well for the ACC, once a month.
Okay. Committee, are we comfortable with at least once a month?
I'm fine with that, and we're not dictating what those meetings are. So if there happen to not be any cases, then that'll probably be a shorter meeting. But I think it's good for consistency's sake and to get somebody on a rhythm of meeting during certain days with, pandemics happening and life happening. I think, that makes sense.
I will just point out, and I don't know the answer to this, but if the state law said must meet within, monthly or more frequently, or at least once a month, and then they struck that out as far as the ACC, I don't know if that could be interpreted to mean that we don't have the authority to make them meet more often. But
then we should.
Remember, Jawando pointed out, I think it's probably it's in practice probably a moot point. I think they probably will have something to meet about every month. You're probably debating something that isn't going to make that much of a difference, but in real life. But I just want to point that out, that you could see that argument is, well, the intention of the General Assembly was to not make you meet once a month.
But I also, and I appreciate this entire discussion. The other part of this should be that someone that applies to be on these boards should understand how often the possibility, and in this case, it's going to be more than a possibility, it looks like, that they would be meeting. Because if you said, well, it's many times when anybody asks you to participate in the board, it's really not that much work. It's only, 12 times a year. It could easily be many more times. And so I do believe that it's necessary, especially in the very beginning, because people are going to need to figure out and establish what they're doing and how they're going to do it. So I'm comfortable with saying at least once a month. I guess that's the best way to say it, and for both boards. And I think that would help us. And listen, there's going to be mistakes made with this legislation. I hope there's not, but there might be, and we might have to revisit it and come back with other thoughts. But at this point, I think that's the path that we should be going forward with. Any other comments, please? Okay. So, Mr. Drummer, are we clear on this one?
Yes.
Okay.
We're back to qualifications.
Okay. Any discussion on the qualifications?
And I will say they don't need to be the same for the PAB and the ACC. I think it's more critical that you have more qualifications for the ACC.
Right. Any comments on this at all?
Regarding the membership qualifications?
Yes, please.
The PAC has a recommendation regarding the membership qualifications. I'll just read to you what our language stated.
Okay.
Our recommended language was, in addition to the ban on current employees of a law enforcement agency provided in the state law, many witnesses urged the prior service with a law enforcement agency should be a bar to service on the PAB and ACC, but we were not unanimous on that point. Our subcommittee of the Policing Advisory Commission recommended that candidates with prior law enforcement experience could be considered for membership, but not be voting members of the pod. So again, the Policing Advisory Commission is behind us on that one additional addition that we've made, the Hiring and Discipline Subcommittee, that there could be law enforcement officers on the panel, on those boards, but they would not be voting members.
Okay. I do recall that. Councilmember Joando.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I appreciate Mr. Drummer's taking a crack at this language, and the general thrust of this is that I think we all are understanding that the language that was in there is too restrictive. And so, the suggestion that I'll let, SSJC, since they're here, which is nice. This is nice for me too. I don't have to, they can make their own comments, but I do tend to agree that what's really important here for both bodies is which is captured in Mr. Drummer's comments or language, is that you have someone who can evaluate information and balance, be effective in their oversight and in the process. And I think SSJC says procedural fairness, but in the steps, using the information before them and a fair process to evaluate that information, then come to a determination. And that is a skills. Those are skill sets that can be assessed. I don't think it necessarily has to be connected to, or should be connected to, evaluating it in a law enforcement context. I think the thrust of this citizen and resident engagement is that that's what it is. You're trying to get people, there are members who are not in that vein, but the thrust of this is that you want to get input from residents who are experiencing law enforcement in their daily lives, and that is valued, that's important. And so I think I'm open to the exact language, but I think those should be the focuses. And I do think that we probably all agree, hopefully, on no member should be excluded from consideration or disqualified based on immigration status, criminal history, or past professional experience. I think that is a very important thing to put in there, and I'll just speak from this. I've said this before. For example, if you're an African-American man of the age of 21, 1 in 2 have been arrested. And so you would be excluding a whole set of certain types of people, again, that I think also have a valued set of experience. So I don't think that should be, we should be explicit about in immigration status. I would say the same thing. And so that would be another suggestion. And then the final thing I'll say, and turn it back over, is, I'm not on the committee, so I won't propose this as an amendment, but I will suggest at some point, or unless it's suggested here by a committee member, that a police officer or former police officer should not be a member of these, particularly of the ACC, and I think, but also the PAB would make sense. But I appreciate the point that was made by Ms. Hudson, that there was some diversity on that point from the commission. So I'll pause there. I've laid out 3 things, but I just wanted to get them out there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Council Member. Council President Albornoz.
Thanks. So I'll just pick up on where Councilmember Joando's thoughtful comments. So a couple thoughts. One, I do think we don't want to be restrictive in the membership, and ensuring that the membership reflects the diversity of our community and all that brings. Obviously, we want to make sure people have the appropriate professional experience, particularly on the ACC, especially, because human resources and that whole aspect it's an entire field. And at least having some folks with some reasonable level of experiences in addressing those types of issues is not unreasonable. So I think and so I think that there does need to be a higher set of standards for that body. than the general PAB, which I think, both need to be reflective of the diversity of our community and all that that brings. But I think there does need to be, that higher level of experience so that, they can think through the legal aspects of some of this too, which is not insignificant. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of human resource cases. I'm sure everybody on this call has too. And there are a lot of layers to this, and it can get really complex really fast. So having folks that have a general background or some familiarity with that, I think is helpful for everyone. Now, there will be a staff component to this clearly, but I just think having that is going to be important. With regards to whether or not somebody from law enforcement can or should serve, particularly on the PAB, I guess my feeling is in the same way I would not in any way prejudice somebody who may have a criminal background from serving. I don't think it'd be appropriate to automatically assume that just because somebody has a law enforcement background or was an officer that they're going to automatically agree or take the side of the person who's being investigated. Many of the officers that I've spoken to over the last year and a half have been the most ardent in expressing their concern with what they have seen transpired among at least some of their colleagues. And so I think, we can't just assume people are coming at this from a very specific angle. I think that's unfair, and in both sides. So I don't think precluding somebody from, serving just because they have a law enforcement background is appropriate either. In the same way, I don't think it's appropriate to stop somebody who may have a criminal background from serving. This board has to be balanced on all sides, and it has to have trust on all sides. And just, those shared experiences, I think are going to be really critically important that can provide context or discussion, context for the discussion that we know in many instances will be emotional and difficult and hard to process. So those are my general feelings. I would not exclude on either side for the PAB.
Thank you, Council President. Ms. Hudson. You're on mute.
Yes,
there we go.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we included the rest of the Policing Advisory Commission's recommended language. And I've heard some of that resonated here with Councilmember Jawando and Ms. Silver. We also have recommended that professional or lived experiences that members should have a range of professional or lived experiences in areas including but not limited to mental health disabilities, substance use disorders, and living below the poverty level of the county. I think that those are very important areas to be included, and the Policing Advisory Commission has been in agreement on those, on that particular language.
Thank you. This all comes down to, Ms. Silver, I'll get right to you, but this all comes down to who can apply. This isn't who's going to be appointed. This is who can apply. And as has been said several times by many other people, including myself, that this is all about trying to be balanced and fair on all sides. That someone is going to receive the fair discussion that they deserve, and that the public is being well served, as are the people who are actually doing the work or have been charged who are going before that board. So I believe that and there again, I believe an active police officer should not be on the board. But I do believe that there should be some consideration. If somebody were a police officer 20 years ago, that we wouldn't even allow them to ask to be on the board, I do have some difficulty with. The other question that I have, and though I am certainly in favor of that we do not discuss someone's immigrant status, and that people with backgrounds of that note should be allowed to be on the board. Mr. Drummer, can you check if we are giving some payment, whether or not we are allowed to do that because I get confused on how someone with an immigrant status is allowed to have employment and all of that, which I disagree with. I believe they should be able to be employed, but if you could check to make certain that we are not doing something that would be considered illegal. If we're paying, we're going to get to the compensation part.
Okay. I mean, I don't. I mean, if they're not eligible to be hired, you may have a problem. I mean, I'm not sure why you would need to even mention that in the bill. I think it's just like a red flag that people jump on. You can pick who you want, and but to put in things like, we don't care if you're, it's just, I don't think it's even if that's what you want, you don't want to discourage people for that reason. I'm not sure you really want to say that in the law. I think it's a red flag that's gonna, bring people out to attack what you're doing when you don't need to do it. I do, I mean, there are federal laws on who you can hire and who you can pay, and we're not going to be skating that. So I'm not really sure. We would have to, I mean, they wouldn't be an employee. They would get a 1099. I'm not sure you need to, I'm not really sure. I'm not an immigration expert, but I think, I do think it's just not in your best interest to put things like that in the bill. You can do what you want ultimately, but to make broad statements that, I will say there's going to be, more than likely, there's going to be some regulations coming out of the state, and they may have restrictions on criminal background, but certainly no reason for us to put them in there. I mean,
So are you suggesting, Mr. Drummer, that if we don't list all of the lists that we want to have, that we could still have people apply by not listing it? That means that they still could apply.
Yeah, I mean, if you're saying, what I'm suggesting is you don't have to list things to say we're not gonna, I mean, there already is a provision in the state law that's copied in this law about, not discriminating and being representative of the community, and that's already there. To put in things like, we're not going to exclude you because of this, or we're not going to exclude you because of that, those are like negative qualifications. Like, I don't think you really need to do that. I think what you need to put in is what somebody needs, what somebody should have in order to be qualified. Not, well, we don't care if you're this, or if you came here on Tuesday, or if you, I mean, that's more like, I don't think you gain anything by doing that. I think you just want to put in who it is you're looking for.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Silver, followed by Chief Fitzgerald and Councilmember Giwando and Mr. Martinez. Those, as how I saw it, as the hands went up. If it's wrong, please, Ms. Silver, please.
Sure, I was actually going to defer to Mr. Martinez and let him go first, since I've spoken a few times.
Okay, Mr. Martinez, please.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for extending the invitation to CASA to be here for this conversation. I think it's really important that we are really explicit in the bill and having welcoming language for all of our communities. I know it's been discussed a few times in private conversations with council members, as well as today, about immigrant status and the contemplation about whether or not they can be paid. There's a variety of statuses, but as long as someone does have an I-10, they can be paid through the 1099 as an independent contractor. I can get a statement from our legal team as well, just that we have all of our T's crossed and our I's dotted. But I think it is really appropriate to make sure that for CASA members, they know that they're welcome to participate on this board.
Thank you. And that would be helpful if you would furnish that information as well.
Absolutely.
Chief Fitzgerald. Ms. Silver, did you want to also comment or?
I did. Yeah, thank you. I knew that we had an immigration expert here, so I wanted to make sure that he was able to go first. I did want to comment first on the issue of excluding former law enforcement officers. So you all heard the public hearing, and this is about very strongly what the community has said it wants, that the community doesn't feel comfortable having a civilian oversight board that has members that have formerly worked as law enforcement officers. And it's a matter of trust and accountability, and what the community, and these are community boards, wants in this bill. And it also aligns with best practices. When we looked at best practices around the country, looked at advice from the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement Officers, it was really removing law enforcement from these boards altogether. That is, was really the recommendation. And that's why we put that in there. We did say we understand the value that someone who has former law enforcement experience might bring in an advisory capacity. And that's why we said, particularly for the PAB, that if there was a non-voting position created, that we would have no problem with that. And of course, both boards can seek advice and input from current and former law enforcement officers in making their decisions. So I just wanted to speak to that point in particular. And then in terms of the guardrails, which is what we're calling them, that Councilmember Juando lifted up, those are also, they are guardrails. They're meant to do two things. One is to tell the community, who is welcome on this board, and also to hold the council and the county executive accountable for making sure that they are not excluding people based on these two particular areas. And they're areas that are really important because these are two groups of folks, immigrants and people who've had criminal exposure to the criminal justice system, that are, they are Black and brown community members, who are the folks who are most heavily over-policed and most negatively impacted by policing in this county. And so that's why we chose those guardrails, and we chose the recommended, this is what you look for, list of characteristics that Ms. Hudson read, to again be a statement of principles and help guide the executive and this council in deciding who to choose. They're not requirements, they're just recommendations, and having them in there in the text of the bill makes a difference. And that's why we wanted to put them in there.
Okay, thank you. Chief Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank the council president for his remarks regarding former police officers potentially participating, only because I can tell you that I've been in this work for over 39 years, and I am just constantly disappointed and angered by some of the bad conduct that I see on YouTube or on the television, and find myself screaming at the computer monitor when I see that, because it's so destructive of the profession and of course of the public trust. But I would just suggest this. I completely agree with Mr. Martinez and other commenters regarding the very good objective to make sure that this is a welcoming sort of process to all members of the community, to the extent that they could be eligible and do the work. I think that is important. But staying with that concept, I would suggest also that a former police officer who has been very much adherent to the ideals of community trust and so on, can not only be a very, very potentially severe disciplinarian, but also somebody that brings deep insights to the process and could be a valuable member of a committee. So to put some sort of prohibition in early on, I think is to some degree disappointing, because the narrative has been police equal problem. Police are bad. I do understand there is a significant interest in making sure the public trusts these boards, but I would suggest that there are very, very trustworthy and very, very hardworking and honest former police officers out there that would do great work.
Thank you. Councilmember Joando, followed by Council President Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate all the comments, and congratulations on reading the hands order right. You know, that's not easy to do. So I think a couple things. I'll start with where Mr. Martinez left off, you know, in Mr. Drummer's comments. I do think the guardrails or the to use another term, the negative qualifications, the things you can't discriminate against or for people to be on are very important. You know, if you think about our anti-discrimination laws, Civil Rights Act, you know, the way they are phrased is that you cannot discriminate on the basis of these protected classes. And while this is not an anti-discrimination law, it is a body, a public body, whose goal is to address and hold to account when rights and laws have potentially been violated, and the public trust has been damaged. And I think, considering the historical context of policing in our country and the power imbalance that exists, and I'm going to talk about that in relation to the next point in a second as well, many people do not feel involved or included. And there's a lot of shame that goes with people who are either immigrants and or people who have been formerly incarcerated. We as a public, you know, one of the things I get most disheartened about is the community at large. When we talk about people as, like, you know, criminals or whatever, 1 in 3 people in the country spend time in jail, have been arrested, you know, so, you know, it's not so the way I think it's important to say you're part of this in an affirmative way. So whereas I get Mr. Drummer's point legally, I do think it's important to signal, and also to signal to the regulatory bodies and to Annapolis that we as a large jurisdiction, we think this is important. So take that into account when you're doing what you're doing as well. The second thing about the membership, and I understand, and I've talked about this before, you know, I'm the only one on the council who's actually received a check from the Montgomery County Police Department. You know, when I worked there 20 years ago as an AmeriCorps member, I have lifelong friends who are law enforcement and mentors who are great people. This is not about whether there are people who could do this job. This is a balancing of what's the best for this body, this accountability, public, citizen, resident-led body, at a time where we're confronting serious challenges on the accountability side and historically. And I think that's why it makes sense. It sounds like there's agreement. I heard the chair say no active law enforcement. So it sounds like we're at least there's some level of agreement on that. I'm not sure about other committee members, but on the former law enforcement, I still think that makes sense as well, with the caveat, as I said, and just want to be 100% clear on the PAB in a non-voting capacity. If that were existed, that would make sense as well for former law enforcement. But again, this power imbalance in historical context, and we've all been in the room when someone has been railroaded with, well, you don't really know what you're talking about. This is that. And I think nowhere is it maybe worse than in this context. And so I just think we should have this prohibition. It is appropriate for this bill. But I just want to provided some of that context. But again, I don't have a vote, but I appreciate the opportunity there.
Thank you. Council President Albornoz, and he will be followed by Dr. Stoddard.
Thanks. I'll start with, I do think it sends an important message about wanting to ensure the inclusivity of this body to add language, including, and I don't know, we have to figure out how to articulate it appropriately, because regardless of immigration status is actually not going to be accurate, because if you are undocumented, then you will not be able to receive a stipend to be able to serve. And we also want to be very careful people's immigration status right now, in part because of what we went through in the previous administration, has been used to weaponize against a lot of members of our community. And so we want to balance both wanting to be inclusive while also not unintentionally putting somebody in a tough position. So I don't know what the appropriate language is. Something in between wanting to ensure that this is inclusive of everybody, whether it's temporary status or permanent status, but some status here, and ensure that we have a diverse set of voices, but that people that actually can apply, that there are people that actually can apply based on what we say and to set expectations. So I'm going to go back to my team. I'm fortunate to have my Deputy Chief of Staff, Lillian Cruz, who knows a lot about immigration issues and did a bunch of work at the federal level for a number of years. So I don't have a proposal right now, Mr. Chairman, but I commit to working with all of my colleagues, as well as CASA and our key partners, to identify language that's both inclusive, but also takes into account those unusual layers that come with immigration-related issues. And then with regards to the membership, I mean, I still stand by what I said earlier. I think it's important for us to have that representation of folks. I think, I would active, I think does make sense to not have somebody who is currently active, but somebody who is retired. And I'll note, as Ms. Silver pointed out, she's right, that the community input that we heard largely was in favor of the position that SSJC holds. I get that, and I respect that. But I'll note that on our own Police Advisory Commission, there was a difference of opinions on this, and that, there were members that felt strongly on the appointed body that we all worked so hard to stand up to advise us, that there wasn't uniform agreement in that specific issue. So, anyways, on the advisory capacity. So, anyways, I think it's I don't know if we're going to vote on this specific one today or not. And I know Councilmember Hucker hasn't yet weighed in, but I certainly respect and see all sides. I again think that more than just advisory, in addition to advisory, I think it would be beneficial for us to have folks in the room that have that shared that experience that can help be shed light and provide context as deliberations and discussion is had.
Thank you. Right now, for the suggestion that they would be a non-voting member, right now, is there any non-voting members on this board? Would we have to change our legislation to allow non-voting members? How would that work?
Well, first of all, you only have the authority to talk about the number of people on the Police Accountability Board, not the ACC. So just to be clear, we're only talking about the PAB. Right now, there are no non-voting members. Normally, if you have a non-voting member, it's usually an ex officio member who's there because of their position that they hold. Not just like, well, we have some members that vote and some members that don't. If you're going to pick people from the community, I don't see the utility of having a non-voting member on the PAB. Personally, I don't like non-voting members. Means that you have to go to a meeting, but you don't get to really vote. It's like, but usually it's just for ex officio. So if you wanted to put a non-voting member on, I would put somebody who's in a certain position. But that's not really what you're looking for. It's supposed to be a civilian board. So I don't really understand the non-voting position on the PAB for a member of the community. How are you going to pick that person? Unless you want to say you're going to have a non-voting member who is a former police officer and mandate that you have one there, which really you don't have now.
Okay. And I'm going to go through the list that I just went through. Dr. Stoddard, Mr. Sterling, I saw your hand up, and no, I don't
I
see
just
Mr.
wanted,
Sterling.
I needed
there
to
he
give,
is.
I needed
Excuse
to
me?
give one correction. President Albornoz, I think you misunderstood the recommendation that I read. The majority of the Policing Advisory Commission was in agreement that we did not want active police officers on the PAC or former police officers, but given the consideration that possibly there could be former police officers who were in a non-voting capacity, we were in agreement on that.
I see.
There was one member on the PAC who believed that police officers should be on the PAC.
Thank you for that clarification, Ms. Hudson. Appreciate it.
And Mr. Katz, I just wanted to say it was flagged for me. I misspoke a little bit. Active duty police officers cannot be on
Right.
already.
They're already prohibited.
Under state law.
Right.
So
Right.
just so we're clear on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm going to go to Dr. Stoddard. Mr. Sterling, your hand was up. I don't see it up again, but if you wanted to speak, you would be after Dr. Stoddard. I see your hand now. And then I'm going to turn to Chief Jones and see if he has any thoughts on all these discussions. But I'll go through that order. And just as a time check, and I've had a couple of texts from people saying, is there a time frame that we're working on? I believe we're going to wrap this meeting up today by noon, so that we can be moving forward for those who have asked and texted. Dr. Stoddard, please.
Yeah, this is a bit of a challenging issue to raise. So I know we've talked about criminal records, and I want to speak very clearly that the county executive supports, no exclusion on a committee like this based on criminal record history. But I will tell you, based on the reports that we've received on the preliminary discussion of the ACC regulations that are likely to go forward, there is discussion that there may be some sort of limitations on criminal history, more narrow than I think a broad criminal history prohibition. But I just want to make sure the council is aware that the ACC regulations may include language that you would then have to reconcile, and potentially if you've already nominated and appointed members, it may create conflicts where you have a conflict between the state regulation and our local county bill. And so again, I want to be very clear. The county executive supports inclusion of anyone, regardless of criminal history, but we are aware of that being part of the discussion of the drafting group that was developed these draft regulations that are going before the ACC, and the draft that we had received a report on does include some limitations there. And so I just want to make sure that was shared with the council and with the advocates, just to make sure that that is there will be a public comment period, and we encourage people to provide public comments there, but I just want to make that known to the committee.
Thank you. And I'm going to call on Mr. Sterling, but I believe we're going to have to call this meeting at 11:45. It's my understanding that we have some people who have other meetings at that point. So it'll be 11:45. And with that, Mr. Sterling, you moved again on me on my Zoom. So anyhow, please.
Committee Chair Katz and members of council, thank you very much. Just analytically, we've been sort of talking about 5 different kinds of things. One is the welcoming language, to use Mr. Martinez's excellent characterization. So that, I think, the council wants to be broad in making clear who's welcome to apply and who we wish the board to include. The second then is the question of what should be the statement of minimum requirements for participation. And there can be different ways of sort of framing what the minimum requirements might be. And in some sense, it's that we want both a commitment to effective oversight, and we want a commitment and an ability to do the work fairly and respect the procedural process. The third category, what are the disqualifying circumstances that an applicant might have? And so we've been circling around what those might be, and we got indication that the state is thinking about certain kinds of disqualifying circumstances. Is having been employed as a full-time police officer a disqualifying circumstance? The fourth that is raised is the question of non-voting participation, and all of the issues that Mr. Drummer raised. And so one potential area could be to include in non-voting participation not only former status as a police officer, but someone whose immigration status was not fully documented in some way. There could be ways in which you could accommodate other statuses in this context of non-voting, recognizing that this is new and ambiguous. And then, of course, the fifth is the meeting of the state requirements. So analytically, just, if we're clear that we're to, about distinguishing between the welcoming language, the minimum requirements, the disqualifying circumstances, whether or not there's a non-voting status, and meeting the state requirements, those at least are the 5 baskets that you're trying to be clear on. Thank you. I hope this was helpful.
No, it was. Chief Jones, I'm going to turn to you. Are you there? I'm not sure that the chief is hearing us at this moment. Is Assistant Chief Franker, would you like to comment on any of this, please? And you're on mute.
Regarding the inclusion, sir?
Yes.
So I would agree with the many points here and really I think this is what Montgomery County is about: inclusiveness, letting everyone be a part of the process. And I would agree with Councilmember Jawanda that and many of the persons here that regarding criminal histories, things happen to people. It doesn't make them terrible people. It's an experience, and they can bring observations, especially about how they're treated as police. One of the things that we talk about in our training is yes, we have a job to do to enforce the laws of the state, but we need to do that with respect. And so if it wasn't, certainly people can bring that valuable experience. On the other hand, regarding police officers, and I'll just say this as a 25-year police veteran with just as Chief Fitzgerald has said, that I see officers that for whatever reason do something that brings dishonor on the profession. I bang my head against the wall too. We don't want that, and that's what the Police Accountability Act, this is what we're trying to do here. I would caution, the same way as we wouldn't exclude someone with a criminal history outright, you can't exclude a police officer. They're part of the community. They want to see our community succeed just like anyone else. And to Councilmember Joanna's point that, people would come into a room and roughshod over people. I've been in meetings my entire life, and that's a personality trait. It's not a professional trait or any sort of trait beyond that. And I would hope that in such a board with such a position, such a high position, that we would have such exemplary members that have this fantastic conversation about what they expect out of our law enforcement. And I have very high hopes for the group that gets put together. But I guess the only other point as far as is talking about police officer, former law enforcement experience or police officers about their experience. And I would dare say that FOP President Holland would agree. We have many, many fine residents in this county that served in law enforcement. And by automatically excluding them out of thought that just because somehow you were a police professional, you can't have a judgment on what you want your community to do. I think that's not a good stance, and it's not a good look for Montgomery County. Because again, I do believe in what the county executive and all of you fine council members talk about constantly, about inclusion, about having a county that everyone has a voice in. So I just wanted to make that point about police officers being part of this community.
I appreciate that as well. I think what I would suggest is that we look into how we would change for the non-voting member. And the meetings themselves are open to the public. They would be open to the public. Is that correct, Mr. Drummer?
The PAB meetings, yes.
The PAB, I don't mean to confuse the confusion here, but the PAB meetings would be open to the public.
Yes.
But the difference would be that they're open to the public, but in some cases it's who's sitting at the table versus somebody that's actually watching from their couch, and so, or wherever they're going to be watching from. And these, when we finally get this going, I would like. I mean, there again, the committee certainly give me your thoughts on this as well. But I would like to explore the possibility of what a non-voting member would be and how that would be handled. And if they are a non-voting member, they would be sitting at the table and would have as much right, if that's the correct term, as anyone else on that committee to speak. So I think that's something we should explore. Once we explore it, then we'll have a deeper discussion, but that's where I am on this. Council Member Hucker or Council President, what are your views, please?
Well, I appreciate the discussion. I agree with, almost everything that's been, so certainly about I look forward to having better language in front of us. We want to be as inclusive as possible, I think, and the language to welcome anyone regardless of their immigration status. And we could even, hold up some of that as a, almost a preference that they've had experience with law enforcement. Anyway, I would like to see that to be as inclusive as possible, and if the council president's going to work on that, that's great. On the other, I appreciate what Councilmember Joando is recommending, but I also know there's a lot of former officers that are now outspoken advocates of police reform, nationally. They're on MSNBC. There's an organization based in New York that bring experience to the table. And to me, given the fact that these people are going to be nominated and confirmed, I got to believe their views and their background is going to come out in that process. And I'd be, more comfortable, certainly if they're in a non-voting role, not having a blanket prohibition like that, because I think there probably are individuals whose expertise may be valuable in the future, and may be allies in having real accountability because of their expertise. But I think it fits into the overall frame of inclusivity that we were talking about. But
thank you. Council President Albornoz, and then we'll turn to Ms. Hudson.
Yeah, I'm open certainly to exploring a non-voting component to the PAB. I think that certainly makes sense. I don't want to complicate this any further than it's already been complicated. And I am concerned about sort of the time commitment. So I think just by the next work session, we should have some options on the table for what non-voting membership might look like, and to ensure that those individuals that for whatever reason, depending on what the determination is made on who can and can't serve and what those guidelines are, but also just having additional voices in the room, I think certainly makes sense. But I also, I've served on a lot of boards and commissions. Everybody on the Zoom has as well. And when it can get, the work can get really complicated, and the communication can become even more complicated. And then, the conflict of who's a voting member and not a voting member, and that can get really complicated. So I just worry that we're going to create more problems than we're trying to solve. And so I'd love to hear what options are out there and what recommendations there may be. but just think through the logistics of what that's going to actually look like in practice, and how that will work within the structure that this group yet decides on how their meetings are going to work. So, you know, I don't, it's another rabbit hole to go down, and I just want us to be very cautious that we don't go too far down that rabbit hole. There's enough to talk about as it is. And so I'm a little anxious about that, but I do think it bears worth a discussion point, and we should have that at the next committee meeting with a couple of options to look at and the pros and cons of each of those.
Right. That's right. Ms. Hudson, please.
Hi, thank you, Chairman Katz. I wanted to make sure that the council members knew that it's very important, the Policing Advisory Commission's recommendation that before presenting selected candidates for the PAB to the council for confirmation, the executive should publish the list of nominated candidates and provide a period of public comment. I understand that there's a tight timeline for this bill, but that is very important that we stress that. That is part of our recommendations, and we hope that you do present any candidates before the public for their in order to receive their comments prior to any council action on those nominations.
And thank you. I do remember seeing that as well, and I am supportive of that. What the time frame is and how it can work, and what happens if it doesn't work that way. We're still under a state mandate. There's all of these issues, but I do believe that we need to be as transparent and as fair and everything else as we possibly can for this board. We have 10 more minutes. I don't know that we're going to take on a new item today, but I do think that I believe I'm hearing consensus from the committee members, and I believe Councilmember Giwando as well, who keeps saying he's not a member of the committee, but he's been here, I think, as much as many other people. I do believe we have consensus that we would like to explore the possibility of the non-voting member, and I just lost my own screen here. I don't know if you all can see me, that we can explore the non-voting member that I think we need to come up with the possibility of the listing so that people will feel that they can apply and that they would not be excluded. I appreciate Mr. Drummer's point, but I do think we should, to say that everybody, you know, in this case, it's everybody except for someone who's in active law enforcement is able to apply, or active law enforcement, or ever was in law enforcement, however that would be worded, is active to apply for a voting member of the board. The fact is that there should be some listing in some way. And so I don't know how we can do that, but I think that should be explored as well. And there again, I think it's necessary to remember, and I think others have pointed this out as well, this is so that someone would apply to be on this board. There's a vetting process, which maybe will take longer than anything else, but there's a vetting process for who would actually serve. But this is just so that you can be able to apply to be on these boards. So is there consensus on that we ask our staff to explore those issues? Are we okay on that?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, very good. So Mr. Drummer, I have a couple yeses on that. And Mr. Giwando was not, and I have a thumbs up for Mr. Giwando. So we're good for the non-voting, he's a non-voting member of this board. So
I'm showing the power. I'm showing the power of non-voting membership.
Yes, you are very, very, very illustrative. Chief Jones, we had turned to you, and Chief Frank, Assistant Chief Frank, did an extremely good job explaining. But did you have any comments before we leave today?
No, well, I apologize for having to step out. I was dealing with a family situation.
Somehow I understand you're a little busy at times. Just call me way out there.
Yeah. Understood. I think I caught a little bit of what Assistant Chief Frank had noted. And I would concur with the notion that law enforcement officers, particularly those who have been in the field before, or who may be retired, or who have had some previous experience in the field, are members of our community. I know many of them may not necessarily work for this agency, but I would say this as well. I think that to make a judgment, to think that individuals are going to be simply biased. I know many officers and members of even my executive staff who are very fair and just in identifying poor performance or poor behavior by our officers, and it's rightly so, and held against those officers in order to address issues along the way. I mean, as anybody who manages any particular agency, or you manage, supervise people, that is a part of management. That's a part of leadership, that you actually are addressing the behavior that is wrong by any employee, and how you hold them accountable. So for those to believe that simply that people will be part of something and be prejudiced, I think that's in its own right can be a biased opinion in that regard. And so I just want to be fair, that this is a fair process, that all individuals that are brought into it, and I applaud the fact that community members can be a part of a process, but it's unique in its own right. Granted that it doesn't occur in every community across this country, because some have it and some don't. But the reality is that I believe that when we look at, again, members of a community, and when knowing, again, parts of this occupation that can be very complicated, I think it would also bring some experience to the actual board, and at least to give them some insight on law enforcement policies, the like, as they're making their decisions. So that's just my take in regards to that.
Thank you very much. Unless the committee or anyone else, for that matter, has anything else, we're not going to start a new topic. We have a whole 5 minutes, so we're not going to start a new topic. But is there anything else to come before us today? I know we've given our staff plenty of work to do, so we are going to have at least one more committee meeting, and then it's going to be a committee of the whole for the entire council. Councilmember Hucker, and then we're going to go to Ms. Silver.
I don't want to.
Your hand was up.
No, I don't want to belabor anything, Mr. Chairman. I just would. Mr. Drummer was nice enough to write up the requirement that the executive, that the name and qualifications of each nominee would have to be placed on the county website for 10 days before submitting the name to the council for comment. That came up, and that's already been drafted as amendment.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Silver, I think you might have the last word. I don't know if anybody ever has the last word here, but anyhow.
I just wanted to clarify if the committee had decided to strike the current membership requirements, because that was at the beginning of the discussion, and we didn't circle back to that.
Yeah, no, I think yes. I think the answer is yes. We did strike those requirements, and now we're grappling with the concern of how we would list that everybody's invited to apply. So, which is also a discussion. But anyhow, that is where we are.
We're not in disagreement on that. What the committee hasn't done is agreed on what the minimum qualifications should be. I mean, you can have no qualifications, or you can put in qualifications. That's really the heart of the matter, I think, more than the prohibitions on who can apply, is who is going to be eligible and who is going to be qualified and what you are looking for. And just my understanding, I didn't hear any that hasn't been decided.
That part has not been decided.
That is
correct.
I made some suggestions and put all things in at the beginning of this all together. But you're right, Bob, that you suggested some language. I quoted some language. I think one of the things, if I could suggest to the chair, is that I think there needs to be some offline work to try to come back with a melded update based on this discussion, which I think there's a lot of consensus on that particular point, that there should be a set of qualifications that should be inclusive. So I think there needs to be some updated drafted language is how I would think would be the next step.
And I certainly am in agreement with that. And I do believe it would be helpful to have that melded language in front of us, because as we can tell, it gets a little confusing to start with. So if we could have that, those possibilities by our next meeting, so that we can continue to move forward on this. In one breath, it is very difficult because of the timeline that the state has set up. In another breath, it's actually probably, as much as I hate to use this term, helpful that we are doing this as quickly as we possibly can, and doing it right. That's also something I always like to mention, so that we actually will get this done. So we are trying our best to do that. We will get this done and be within the state law. And with that, unless there's another comment, thank you all very, very much for being with us. We appreciate the table, as large as it was, and we will see each other again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.